Get ready to discover some of the most actionable DevOps techniques and tooling, including performance and reliability with some of the world's smartest engineers. Hey, I'm Joe Colantonio, host of the DevOps Toolchain podcast, and my goal is to help you create DevOps Toolchain awesomeness. Hey, it's Joe, and welcome to another episode of the Test Guild DevOps Toolchain. Today, we'll be talking with Parasar all about change-controlled continuous testing pipelines in the cloud or on the cloud. If you don't know, Parasar is the founder and CEO of Digy4, home of the cloud-first testing solution built on an ecosystem of cloud-based products in QE. So really excited to talk to him about this. He has over 21 years of experience in quality engineering and extensive enterprise automation knowledge and DevOps knowledge as well. Prior to founding his company, he was the head of quality engineering in global organizations like Air Canada and other large corporations. He's been a global evangelist and speaker on QAOps, DevOps for a while, and he also organized or is the organizer of the Toronto Testing Meetup, which I believe is, I think, the second largest testing meetup community in Canada. So really excited to have him on the show. You don't want to miss it. Check it out. This episode is brought to you by SmartBear. As businesses demand more and more from software, the jobs of development teams gets harder and harder. They're expected to deliver fast and flawlessly, but too often they're missing the vital context to connect each step of the process. And that's how SmartBear helps. Wherever you are in the testing lifecycle, they have a tool to give you a new level of visibility and automation, so you can unleash your development team's full awesomeness. They offer free trials for all the tools, no credit cards are required, and they even back it up with a responsive, award-winning support team. Shorten your path to great software. Learn more at smartbear.com today. Hey, Parasar, welcome to the Guild.
Thank you, Joe. Glad to be here.
Awesome to have you. I know you've joined us on the Automation Guild Automation podcast. This is the first time on the DevOps Toolchain, so really excited to get your point of view on DevOps and how QA fits into it. So I guess the first thing is, anything I missed in your bio that you want the Guild to know more about? I usually butcher the bios, so anything you wanted to add?
No, I think you actually covered things pretty well. One thing I wanted to mention, I was very excited to come to this show. I have been two of these shows before, right? And after this testing cloud show, a lot of people kind of watched it, and when I met them, they mentioned, oh, I watched you in the testing cloud, right? That thing. So I felt this is a kind of a natural progression going into that, where we will talk more how you can take that testing cloud into an implementation mode. So I was very excited to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, great. Awesome to hear feedback like that. So, the topic is change-controlled continuous testing pipelines on the cloud is what you recommended. So why this particular area that you want to focus in on?
See, before even we go to this question of I want to kind of highlight one point in the industry level thing, right? Is the world of development has moved on to DevOps, right? People realize that, okay, only developing code is not good enough to bring the efficiency in the software delivery cycle. It needs an operational model called DevOps. Now, but there is no mirror operational model like QAOps in the QA domain, right? So what happens is you build the tools, okay, and you build the automation, but because of a lack of an operational model, it's always struggling to get that efficiency. So if you take this whole thing, there are 4 quadrants. One is tool, one is data, infrastructure, then you have another quadrant as your AI, and then another quadrant as reporting. But what brings everything together is the pipeline, and that is the operational model. That's the DevOps. And I'm so glad that you're kind of bringing this up on the DevOps as a separate topic, right? We exactly need to talk about what is QAOps and need to bring this QAOps in the industry. Now, let me get to your question. The question is why to talk about this kind of the impact-based kind of DevOps thing, right? Now, when you are kind of using continuous testing, automation is pretty dumb, right? If you don't have a intelligence built on it, right? Let's say you are setting up a continuous testing pipeline, But if you don't have an intelligence built on it, that which knows when a code is changed somewhere, what set of tests to run, and build up a pipeline in a way which is to that extent scalable of what the change has been, because it's a big change needs a big amount of execution capability. A small change needs a small amount of execution capability, and you need to focus on that exact change rather than running everything every time. You're going to lose a lot of money in that space, right? In that, so that's why it's very important to think about a impact control execution model. And if I can take a moment to kind of bring up a slide, okay, which can actually show you that piece, right? The impact oriented thing.
And for the folks that are listening to the audio only podcast, definitely I'll have this embedded in the show notes as well with the YouTube version, with the video to follow along if you're missing out on anything.
Thank you, Joe, for that note. Let me just show you that stuff, this, right? See, when your code is kind of making a entry into your testing environment, testing environment need to identify the pulse, right? Okay, what is change? And then has to use a test management as a control center. And that control center should be able to kind of know what the change has been and pick up the test, automation test, or the test what you need to run on that. And then it need to pick up a infrastructure of the size of the change or the execution that you want to do. And end of the day, you want to report it based on the change that has happened, right? So end of way, from the beginning to the end, you can have a change and a control testing pipeline which is exactly focused on that change. And you can do it by building tags and bringing an intelligent mechanism into this. So this is why I think it's why we need something impact control kind of testing pipeline.
No, I 100% agree. A lot of times people say, well, we have the infrastructure and containers, we could just scale up and run every test, but it's very inefficient to me, and it causes a lot of noise and a lot of maintenance when you just run every test for every check-in. But getting in, being able to do that mapping is sometimes difficult. Even teams, if they're using tagging, don't necessarily know that the code being checked in may impact test 1 and 5. So how do you make that connection?
So the connections can be made because those pulses and the indicators are already there in your commit, right? So commit, most of the time you have that information, like what has changed, literally, that will say a story, this particular story has changed, or it may say this particular module has changed, or it may also have that, okay, this is a large change, right? So once you have that information in your code commit, right, and then you have a similar kind of mechanism on your test management system. And we got to use test management more as a control system, a control center, rather than just becoming a still a repository of test cases, right? So here in the test management, you got to have some mirror tags. So when you run a test, okay, which test is related to which story, what module, what complexity, what is this test a part of the regression, a small regression or big regression? From there, you can make these two ends joined, and that's what we also built. We built an intelligent module who can read up what the code changes are happening, and then kind of also tag this with the changes which are there in the tests that are there for testing those things, and we can match them together and build that.
Awesome. Now, I think I may have jumped ahead. I think I could be wrong. Did you call this, what do you call this? Do you call this testing pipeline as a package? Like, what is this kind of framework or kind of flow?
Yeah, so that's very interesting. You asked the package part of it, right? If you look at the software industry, right, today's world, everybody is becoming a package, right? If there's a package software like SAP, there's a package software like Salesforce and thing, right? So, but in testing, how are we doing it? We are building frameworks, we are building pipeline, okay, so we are building tools, but how can we keep up with this? If you think about it, when the development world is using a package and they're making making already a head start, you can't start from ground up. So that's why instead of relying on building tools and things, like we have to think of taking a product and taking that pipeline as a product and then implementing as a package. Now, how we implement that is like we build a model of like, adapters and mechanisms of like, a processing engine, so that when there is a new tool, like let's say you are using for like, CI/CD, like, GitHub, you can have an adapter of GitHub coming up and it will configure to GitHub. But somebody is using Jenkins, can use like an adapter of Jenkins and do that. This is the same model Jenkins uses, like, that the plugins in the stuff, right? The Jenkins plugins, and kind of adapt to several things. So by that, you can build up a pipeline as a package and deploy the package. Instead of losing time to build it, you build it from a package and start focusing on your test cases.
Nice. So the package will already know the components that need to be in that environment when you run those tests without you having to configure every time. Is that what I'm hearing?
Exactly. Right.
Nice.
Yeah.
So how do you achieve then this change control pipeline? Is it just tags as well that determine how what test to run?
It's actually like, different mechanism, like, and it has a maturity model, right? Initially you start with very simple, like, getting up the tags and stuff, right? You get the tag, then you kind of like, map it to your test cases and do that. And as you mature in the organization, you start looking at shift right as well, right? You start getting indications from your production as well. The production may have, like, you may have a particular change which has caused problem multiple time in production, and that may be something which may actually say this is a high priority test. And this may, if you ran that previously, you may already gather that I have run this many test cases along with it, right? So you do a shift left, where you kind of like, figure out that, okay, what is the test cases to be associated with a change of code, and you do a shift right, where you also bring parameters from the production saying that, if this thing has happened before, these are the tests I have run. With these two knowledge, you bring up a dynamic way of test selection.
Very cool. So is this a solution that you have with with your company?
Yes, so that's something that we are pioneering in the industry. Like, you can't keep like running automation test as a static regression. You got to kind of think about how to make it dynamic, how to make it continuous, so you can scale, but you can scale optimally.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love this for sure, especially as more and more code is being created nowadays, especially using AI.
Yeah.
I see, you need to be a little more selective with the tests that you're running and using tools like this. So over time, does your tool become, like you said, it knows over time then that you checked in this before, here are the tests you ran. So it knows that maybe next time you check in, let's run these tests as well again.
Yeah, so that's something, the intelligence, like, that comes with the maturity, right? Once the customer start using it, like, you kind of like, start building up from there.
Now you mentioned maturity a lot. When you speak with DevOps in general, do most
Yeah.
people? Now I have this conversation before. They're like, you shouldn't confuse testing and QA with DevOps. It's totally separate. You're confusing things when you add the two. But I think they're essential. They're one and the same. Just your thoughts on this. Have you ever gotten in conversations like that, or why convincing people that maybe DevOps engineers, why QA and testing are essential for DevOps?
I think that's a very good area to kind of talk about. Like, I always get into this conversation with that. Like, I see there is a need of segregating this segment and saying this is QAOps, because that segment need to mature, and the segment will only mature when you recognize that as a separate segment. So I tell you this, like, when you see a profile of a DevOps engineer, will a DevOps engineer ever write, okay, that he or she had experience on like Selenium or Cypress, right? They won't write that. They will say, like, I have worked in Kubernetes, I have worked in this. So their profiles are not aligned to what is required for a testing pipeline creation, right? And most of the SDETs are looking at, they are not looking at that, okay, they are Kubernetes expert or they are cloud expert. They are testing expert. So there's a gap in the industry, right? The people who have both the knowledge, like how do you do this, like Kubernetes, how do you do the pipeline creation, and how do you do Dockers and those things, and also have the knowledge how do you use test data, how do you use like different tools like Selenium, browser stack like Cypress, different other things, right? And all together bring up a pipeline. They don't need to be that testers, that team, they are not trying to break the test, but they are trying to build the infrastructure which is required to for the test to run fast.
All right. So with this gap, then, do people need to upskill? Or do they use a solution like yours that helps them with QAOps and then almost bakes in that type of knowledge rather than having to expect a DevOps engineer to know testing or a tester to know Kubernetes?
Yeah, so I think we need to have people who have that niche knowledge or who have the passion, like who are already architects or kind of senior estates, right? There are so many people in this industry who can actually get to that level of becoming the QA ops people, right? Because these days it's not only tool, it's also infrastructure, right? So how do you tie infrastructure with tool and build a pipeline? That's where the solution of efficiency comes in.
Very nice. So can you talk a little bit more about that then? Then your solution then does build that bridge between infrastructure
Yes.
and the test?
Yeah. So what we focus on is called two things which are have been not focused much in the industry. Cloud in the I'm not, when I say industry I mean QE side, cloud and QA ops, right? That's why we build cloud based QA ops, right? The whole pipeline, how can I make that pipeline on the cloud, and how can we take the industry more to the cloud? They create the test, put it in the pipeline, get it in the cloud, move it fast.
So it's like a self-service solution then as well. A lot of companies I speak to now have, rather than having to depend on the DevOps team to spin up the containers or the testers to get them in the pipeline. It sounds like this is almost like a self-service solution as well.
We haven't got to the self-service mode, right? A bit of things kind of still done on an integration mode, like we're doing it, but eventually we want to evolve as a self-service mode, right? That's where the whole concept, this is why I kind of mentioned, I'm actually seeing this as a kind of continuation of that discussion of testing cloud. A lot of people ask how do you get that thing, right? So this is where kind of this can evolve as the how we do the clusters in cloud, right? The clusters are everything. It has the framework, it has the infrastructure, it has the reporting. It's just a testing cluster. You just upload your test script there, and the cluster can take care of running it in pipeline mode.
So, you mentioned four areas when you were talking about QAOps. So I think we pretty much covered the tools.
Yeah.
You talked about data. So
Yeah.
how is data different when you're trying to get QAOps within the DevOps type of pipeline?
I think when we talk about data, there are two parts of the data. One is the data that goes into injection mode, and the one is the data that comes out of the test, which is your reporting mode, right? Let's talk about the testing, the injection mode, like your test data piece, right? The test data piece is something we have to think about, uh, is right now test data, how to generate data in volume. Because what these pipelines will usually do is create enormous amount of execution capacity, right? And you are running 24 into 7, right? So you need a lot of reusable data to be created, or you have to know when the data is kind of used up, and you have to kind of refurnish the data. So that capability of test data has to be done. And I have mentioned something in my post and stuff, test data automation need to be talked about, right? Test data automation. Now, how you generate, not you generate the data only manually, but how do you generate automated way of generating data, and data which is business process oriented data. So this is the first piece, the injection piece. We have to think about it. The second piece is the reporting, right? Okay, the data that is coming out, like you have a pipeline and you have an automation. So you have pretty much nailed down the execution part of it. Like you are not doing anything manually. But where are you then spending your time most on? On analyzing your failures, right? Because your time is going on debugging and getting to the root cause. And that's where you need to think about tools like a reporting tool which can bring up data from different sources. You may be running web test or a API test or a mobile or anything else, maybe you are running a load test. How do you see everything in one single pane of reporting? Right, so that way you can slowly get everything, and you need to have a history in it, right, so that you can get the whole holistic view and cut down your time of your reporting. And glad we have a kind of also a solution on their space, like we call it DG dashboard. Okay, so that's something that we do on the reporting side.
All right. So I test data is very important. I totally agree. So does Digi have a Digi test data solution then, or is that handled by something else and you act like a framework that these different solutions would plug into?
So we haven't got into the test data yet, like the solutioning part of it. Okay, that's something will be coming up in our upcoming years. Firstly, we wanted to build this pipeline and the reporting, right? These two things, and then you start kind of creating that need of this volume data. Once we get the volume data need, and then we will kind of build a solution around this. But there's a way we kind of propose our clients and customers to kind of start this process, right? And we propose to start from the reporting in, because when you start reporting, you can actually start figuring out the efficiency of automation. You have invested in automation, people and money, right? But you need to know, are they like, is this automation stable? Is it finding quality issues in your system? So that's why we created the reporting dashboard, which is called the Digi dashboard. And the most important features of those are kind of it's a universal dashboard. It can take data from different frameworks, different infrastructure, like you are maybe in cloud or a VM, you may be using a cloud providers. You can take data from there. The second is it can do enterprise. It can collate data from multiple sources and kind of show that you can filter it, dice and size based on that particular team, right? And then it's a real time, and finally it's a cloud based, right? This is a more so you don't need to think about how my capacity of storage is going to be, you can do it optimally. So that's the first point. You start getting those stats and the stuff, then you kind of moving to the doing something is not working right, and you figure out and build that pipeline so that you can build the efficiency from there. So that's the second piece, and then we will go to the test data piece.
Nice. So with the Digi dashboard, then, these KPIs, people never know really what to look at. Out of the box, does it let you know, hey, this test suite you've been running fails X amount of time, and it only has coverage with 10% of your application? Is that the type of that type of detail you can get out of it?
Yes, exactly. That's the kind of detail you can get out of it. We allow you to build custom metrics, because these are enterprise level thing. It can be used in smaller organization, even in larger organization, right? And every organization has their own need of metrics, right? One organization, I tell you, I mean, they came and said, we use a lot of vendors, right? And we want to know, how are these vendors performing in those certain areas, right? And then we had a metrics which is specific for that, right? And some organizations said, I also want to see a metrics of a time, right? Okay, that what is the time taken over the time for a customer journey, right? A metrics of that, right? So we have that metrics as well, right? We also have that kind of the granularity of if something fails, all the log, screenshot, videos and everything together. So this is a more persona ways, you can get the metrics, which is stats, as well as you can go and see what a country or tester would need, all the details to get from a issue to a root cause and fix it.
So someone's trying to envision this. How's this different than, say, a browser stack or a Lambda test, which is like a test environment in the cloud?
Yeah.
How is this different?
I mean, very good question. We got to understand the tool segregations, right? The thing. So when you look at browser stack or let's say Lambda test, right? So they are going to report only on their system. They only going to show what has happened on there. So what we do is we over the time, we have more than 10 partners in the who are building these solutions together. We kind of um, So what happens is, I'm just going to, I had a discussion with Tricentis, Tricentis being such a big organization, we are also kind of partnering with them. So what happens is, no matter whether you are using browser stat, Lambda test, pcloudy, or Perfecto, like any one of them, we gather the data and still show the data. For an end user, they don't need to worry about, whether they did. They just can see everything, the logs in there. At the same time, like whether you use Tricentis or you use Cypress or you use Selenium, right? You can still see everything in one place.
Okay, all right, definitely. So I'm just thinking, like, when you go in front of your executives or something, they don't necessarily care. Oh, this is what happened. So this is what happened. But it's almost like a high level executive go to QAOps dashboard of everything that's going on within the organization. Almost. Am I understanding that correctly?
Exactly. So we call it, it's a persona base, and three personas are there, right? One persona is a directors and above, right? So they care about what is the state of union of quality, right? They don't care about logs and stuff. They care about, is the organization, big programs are working fine, right? Okay, is that completed or not? So we give that view, organization view. Then you talk to the managers who are more focused on their side of the story, their teams and their things. Okay, we allow them to cut and dice the data based on that. And then again, finally, we have the people who are also developers and testers who are trying to figure out what exactly failed in their test and get to the root cause, right? So we give all these personas, so everything can be in one place, and you don't need to keep maintaining different spreadsheet or different kind of reporting system. We just bring everything together.
So how extendable is your solution? Because it sounds like you want to work with everything. So
Yeah.
do you have an API that people like that can interact with, or do you have to create accelerators or something to get something integrated with your solution?
So the whole process that we think about is to acceleration. Like, in think about the build versus buy thing, right? I can have a tool and then build the integration and do the stuff, right? How long does it take you to kind of be operational, right? And even if you do that, it can only be used in one team. But how can you do the enterprise level? So what we do is, we get the tool, like we help you with the integration, right? The integration is, we take care of it, and you get that everything up and running within the shortest span of time.
Very nice.
Yeah.
So how long is that process then?
Usually, we take 2 to 3 weeks to kind of get the organization start up. Imagine you're running on a enterprise reporting dashboard, first time in the industry. That's why we realize that reporting is a big challenge, and there is not much focus in that area, like how reporting can be made faster. And I give you some stats, if you do reporting faster and get to the root cause, faster, you'll probably be saving 30 to 40% of your time of analysis and also developers time.
No, I definitely agree. I have this conversation for a while where it's called mean time to diagnosis, almost like where a test runs, you have 100 failures, and the next build's about to kick off in an hour. You have no way to go through all 100 tests. If you had a way to triage where it says, all right, 99 of these tests are all due to the same exact error, and this other one's a real issue, it just allows you to triage quicker. So
Yeah.
does your reporting do that for you, or does it just highlight all the different areas? Does it actually do any type of automated triage for you?
It does allow you to, because it captures not only the test, it captures the actually the trend as well, right? So what happens is, you're seeing one test case, but that test case has run maybe 5 times, 10 times, right? So what happens is, once you can see all the 10 results in one place, you can instantly make that call whether it was a flaky test or was a stable test. If it's a flaky test, instead of analyzing it, fix it first, right? And then start looking at the the error messages on those things, right? First fix it, bring it back stable, because that is not giving you an application issue. That is giving you your automation is not stable, right? So that piece is gone. And more we are also going into that direction. Like, we are first getting that data marked with the organizations that we are trying to work with. We are trying to get them their data in one place. Then we can try to analyze and give them the direction that, instead of doing a search, can we recommend you that you should be looking at this particular failure because this has caused problems in production. Maybe this is more function, more business critical. This may have other issues, side effects as well. So we are going to give you that recommendation as well. We are not there, but that's something we are trying to build. As we build the data, we are building that intelligence that how to kind of also analyze the data and get to that.
All right. So speaking of intelligence, a lot of data.
Yeah.
People must ask you all the time, what's going on with AI, machine learning? Is that something that's built into the product? Is it on your roadmap? What's your view on this?
Absolutely. I'm glad you asked this question. I get asked this question every time when we talk about data, right? Because so I'll break it up into two parts. Okay. So two things we are trying to leverage data here, the AI capabilities here, right? One is analysis, right? Where we should focus. Okay. Because there are so many failures happening, some things we want to give you that recommendation where you should focus. Now, once you get to focus, what you need to look at, we are slowly trying to get to that point that we can get you to the closest root cause of that, right? So this is where we want to kind of get that information and AI, right? Because you need AI here, true AI, because it cannot be done by programming. Because every day and day out, there are so many error things which are happening. New errors are coming into the thing, right? And you also have to understand, once you do a analysis, you have to have a feedback loop and saying, what, we did this analysis and this is the root cause. So models have to pick up that information. So we were trying to get to that point that we call it DG predict, right? Okay, it should be able to kind of do the predict, what maybe the root cause had happened, right? So that's where we want to kind of go towards that, coming to that, first recommending you what you should be looking at, and also trying to get you to the point, what is the cause of it.
Okay. Before we go, is there one piece of actionable advice you can give to someone to help them with their DevOps, QAOps efforts? And then what's the best way to find, contact you, or learn more about your solution at Digy4?
So I think what I would mention here is yes, we talked about technology, right? But to bring technology in an enterprise, you need always guidance, mentorship, and collaboration, right? So everybody in the industry who is trying to kind of adopt new technology, where there is a challenge or there is kind of resistance, reach out to the industry. Okay, reach out to people around you, right? Okay, and have a conversation, collaborate, and see how somebody has done it. Maybe you can find a solution there. You can have a conversation which can help you in solution. So instead of having silos and trying to kind of do that solutioning yourself, reach out to the community. And we have an excellent community. I'm thankful for Joe for kind of keeping us always so connected. So this community will help you to kind of adapt, and that's where together we can bring a positive change in the industry, right? And to your question about how they can connect, I'm very active on the social media, especially on the LinkedIn. You can always connect me, you can type my name and it will come up. I do have another note on the thing, one floor CEO. I'm the CEO of Digy4, but that's another tagline I have. Reach out to me through LinkedIn. That's one of the thing. And always you can connect through as well as Digy4. Connect to us in Digy4. We can have a bigger discussion about how we are using cloud-based QAOps to change the ecosystem of quality engineering.
And for links of everything of value we covered in this DevOps Toolchain show, head on over to testguild.com/P11E. And while you're there, make sure to click on the Smart Bear link and learn all about Smart Bear's awesome solutions to give you the visibility you need to deliver great software. That's smartbear.com. So that's it for this episode of the DevOps Toolchain show. I'm Joe. My mission is to help you succeed creating end-to-end full-stack DevOps Toolchain awesomeness. As always, test everything and keep the good. Cheers. Hey, thanks again for listening. If you're not already part of our awesome community of 27,000 of the smartest testers, DevOps, and automation professionals in the world, we'd love to have you join the fam at testguild.com. And if you're in the DevOps automation software testing space, or you're a test tool provider and want to offer real-world value that can improve the skills or solve a problem for the Guild community, I'd love to hear from you. Head on over to testguild.info and let's make it happen.